finer example of quintessential English countryside you'd be hard pushed to find anywhere else. But what's been going on in this quiet corner of Northamptonshire could have profound implications for the way we communicate regarding planning as we go forward. So although you might never have heard of this village, it is a name that's worth remembering because we can learn a lot from what happened here. The village of Duddington discovered a couple of years ago that somebody was intending to build a radioactive waste disposal facility around about 1.5 miles past the village over that way. And like a lot of communities, they organised themselves to protest against this planning development, right the way through to actually holding a parish poll, a referendum if you like, around local villages. And the result of that referendum was around about 98% of the population who took part voted against this facility. But despite all these techniques, which will be enshrined within the Localism Act, the Secretary of State still chose to say yes to this facility when the community said no. So where does that leave localism afterwards? And what can we learn about the consultation process that this community experienced to see if we can make sure that as developers going forward, we can actually communicate more effectively?
Well, the waste tip has been there for quite some time, about 30, probably more years. In the last 10 years, it started taking hazardous waste, and it was taken over by Aegean, which actually, I have to say, they did do a much better job in terms of cleaning up the act of the place. But then they made an application for low-level radioactive waste in 2010, and it was turned down by parish councils, district councils and Northamptonshire County Council. We decided to group together as a set of villages, 12 villages, under the umbrella of Local Democracy in Action. And we started in January of this year. So we got together and decided that we needed to do something to let the Secretary of State know the strength of feeling in the local community. The decision was made to go for a series of parish polls. Now, given that we were 12 villages, that presented lots of difficulties logistically, but we had very good supporters who funded posters, etc., and we managed to get
Can I ask you about that then? You obviously decided, you organised yourself as a group to protest about this, but then you decided to have a parish poll. Why did you think that would be a good tool to try and get your message across?
Well, we looked at various options, things like having, petitions and so on, and online petitions. Frankly, I don't think they're worth the paper they're written on. They can easily be discarded.
So how much does it actually cost to organise a parish poll?
It depends on the size of the village. The smallest villages were around £300 and the larger villages were over £500. So it depends on the number of people who are eligible to vote.
And how many people turned out and what was the result?
Right. In the closest villages to the site, the turnout was around 60 to 65%. In the villages further away, the turnout was less than that, about 30%. And the result, of the people who voted, it was 98.5 who did not want the site to go. Each village will have paid on average around about £400, so multiply that by 12.
Yeah.
We've got that. Then the biggest cost, in all honesty, is taking it to the High Court. And I think people would have to be very wary about doing that. We were warned beforehand that we would need to try to raise about £30,000.
Do you think there's anything more that the company could have done with effective consultation which would have made this development more acceptable to the local community?
Lately, the company has become a lot more involved with the community, and I think that's partly as a result of our actions, I have to say. They have had open days, they've had consultation days in a local hotel, they've gone around the villages consulting people. So in the last few months they have certainly increased the amount of consultation. It's a huge issue of trust between companies and local people, and I think they've got a hard job now to recover that trust in the local community.
So if another community was facing a similar situation, I mean, what advice could you give them about what they should do in preparing to oppose an application like this?
Okay. If it was a similar application, I would say to think carefully, pick your arguments carefully, first of all. I would say to be very careful about the question that you were asking in a parish poll or referendum, because it's crucial. We had difficulties with that. Be sure that people are generally behind you. First of all, do your homework first. When we went round the villages asking people how they felt, and I think it's really important to gauge that before the money then comes off the parish precept and so on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Maggie, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank
you.
you.
So some wise words from Maggie there about organising yourself to protest about development taking place near communities. But 30-odd thousand pounds in, they still don't know whether they've been successful in stopping the development of this landfill site. As developers, we must try and learn from that experience to say that if we can consult with local communities more effectively, actually there can be benefits for you as developers. So if we want to do that, we need to find out what's the best way of consulting with communities. Well, who better to ask than the Consultation Institute? Rian, if I can ask you, what would you say is truly effective consultation?
In a word, doing it honestly. We call it integrity. What we mean by that is you haven't made up your mind before you go and ask people their views.
Mm-hmm. We find that when we're out talking to members of the public, they're very cynical about consultation processes. Do you think they have good grounds for that?
Well, are you surprised? Of course they're cynical. And the reason for that is that people have played fast and loose with consultation for years. Governments do it, local authorities do it, health service do it, we've all done it. But I think the popular mood now has changed. They will take the view, don't waste my time unless there is something I can influence. And the hallmarks of a good consultation these days is convincing people that you're genuine, you're serious, and you're not wasting their time.
If you were going to talk to a developer about how best to do consultation, what would be the 3 key things that they need to get right?
Well, to be fair, I think the best in the industry are already doing a reasonable job. I think it's the rest of the industry that we have to encourage. And the 3 things: timing, do it right at the very beginning, before you've settled on a preferred way forward. I would say talking to the right people. There are people who are massively impacted by what you're proposing, and there are other people who maybe are less so, and you need to target the dialogue in the right way. And the third thing, I mentioned the word dialogue, it's got to be two-way. It's not a question of one side shouting its views to another. There has to be a genuine two-way conversation.
We find that quite often with the development, there might be a group of residents who live very close to the development who appear not to be listening to what developers have to say to them. Do you think that effective consultation can help break down those barriers?
Well, you need something else. You asked me for 3. The 4th one is it's got to be based on good information, honest information. And very often people who do take an oppositional viewpoint, do so without the best information. I mean, they will half hear, half information, and is it any surprise then that the dialogue is based upon a lot of myths rather than reality? So one of the things that developers can do is make sure that at least all the facts are out there, transparent, in the open, and they're honest.
Brian, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So what we've been trying to do in this film is to see if we can find out the best ways to use consultation to try and improve the way that actual planning development takes place. And that's through the building of genuine dialogue between a developer and a host community. So it was really interesting to hear Maggie talk about her experience of dealing with a landfill operator that was trying to build a radioactive waste landfill site near her village. And she said that as time went on, actually the company became far better at communicating with the local community, and perhaps they in turn became far better at listening to what the company was trying to say. They were building genuine dialogue. And that was the key point that Rian was making about effective consultation. It has to be a two-way process where that process has a genuine opportunity to influence the final outcome. Because in that way, both sides can trust each other to look in quite a lot of detail about what's actually being proposed. So as communicators, we live in interesting times. The Localism Act has now enshrined in law a requirement on developers to go out to pre-planning application consultation. So there's a real opportunity to go out and develop dialogue with communities before the actual planning application gets in the way of building trust. And if we use this new time effectively, we will have a far greater opportunity to build trust between the developer and the local community that could be in both their interests. Quicker, faster, more successful planning, whilst at the same time demonstrating that there is something in it for the local community. So the last piece of major infrastructure to try and go through the planning process before the Localism Act became an Act of Parliament was HS2. And it would have been extremely interesting to see how the consultation process would have worked had this particular development been consulted on after the Localism Act was in place. Maybe we could have avoided a lot of the confrontation which is now taking place between small villages dotted around Buckinghamshire and Warwickshire and the HS2 development team.